Plato was a Greek philosopher born in Athens during the classical period in ancient Greece. He was the student of Socrates, teacher of Aristotle, and founder of the Academy, best known as the author of philosophical works of unparalleled influence. Also, Plato is one of the world's best known and most widely read and studied philosopher. Plato's most famous work in the Republic, which details a wise society by a philosopher. He is also famous for his dialogues, early, middle, and late, which showcase his metaphysical theory of forms. Something else he is well known for Plato.
Plato's belief. The cave allegory was created by Plato to exemplify his belief. The allegory begins with prisoners who have lived their entire lives chained inside a cave. Behind the prisoners is a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners are people carrying puppets or other objects. These cast shadows on the opposite wall. The prisoners watch these shadows, believing this to be their reality as they've known nothing else. He finally sees the fire and realizes the shadows are fake. The prisoner code. This prisoner could escape from the cave and discover there is a whole new world outside they were previously unaware of. The prisoner would believe the outside world is so much more real than in the cave. He would try to return to free the other prisoners. Upon his return, he is blinded because his eyes are not accustomed to actual sunlight. The chained prisoner would see this blindness and believe they will be harmed if they try to leave the cave. Like the prisoner chained in the cave, each human being perceives a physical world that is but a poor imitation of a more real world. But every so often, one of the prisoners gets free from the shackles of sense experience, turns around and sees the light. Plato uses the cave to symbolize a physical world, a world in which things are not always what they seem to be, and there is a lot more to it than people think there is. The outside world is represented as the world of ideas, thoughts, and reality. By the world of ideas, Plato is talking about the non-physical forms, and that is non-physical forms represent a higher, more accurate reality. In other words, Plato uses the cave to symbolize a physical world, a world in which things are not always what they seem to be, and there is a lot more to it than the world of ideas, thoughts, and reality. By the world of ideas, Plato is talking about the non-physical forms and that these non-physical forms represent a higher, more accurate reality. In other words, according to Plato, our senses are only picking up shadow. In other words, according to Plato, our senses are only picking up shadows of the true reality, the reality of forms or ideas. This reality can only be accurately discerned through reason, not the physical senses. The process of progressing out of the cave is about getting educated, and it is a difficult process. In fact, it requires assistance and sometimes force. Here, Plato is implying that when getting an education, there is a struggle involved. He is telling us about our struggle to see the truth and to be critical thinkers. We want to resist ignorance is bliss in many ways because knowing the truth can be a painful experience. So in some ways, it is easier to be ignorant. The person who is leaving the cave is questioning his beliefs, whereas the people in the cave just accepted what they were shown. They did not think about or question it. In the other words, they are passive observers. Plato also used this allegory to explain the value of education, learning the hidden truth, and then spreading the truth to others. Beliefs quotes of Plato. If a man neglects education, he walks lame to the end of his life. Without education, a person is less able to distinguish between truth and lie, making them more susceptible to deception and manipulation. Without a formal education, it might be challenging to distinguish between right and wrong. According to Plato, education thinks differently. Therefore, as our conception of truth changes, so will our education. He believed that we all have the capacity to learn, but not everyone has the desire to learn. Desire and resistance are important in education because you have to be willing to learn, although it will be hard to accept at times.
Plato's contribution to philosophy. Plato carved out a subject matter for philosophy by discussing and formulating a wide range of metaphysical and ethical questions. To explain the similarities and resemblances among objects of the physical world, he developed a metaphysics of forms. His views about ethical questions could be grounded in his metaphysics of form via the contemplation of the form of the good. Plato therefore found an inherent connection between metaphysics and ethics. His greatest work, The Republic, developed an insightful analogy between harmony in the state and harmony in the individual, and it is often considered one of the greatest works ever written. Plato wrote dialogues that consider the nature of virtue itself, as well as the nature of particular virtues. He also considered epistemological questions such as whether knowledge is justified through belief.
During his school days and as a lecturer, he focused on the standard curriculum of logic, metaphysics, and classics. And did you know? John Locke's closest female friend was a philosopher also. She was a lady Damaris called Swartasham. Before she married, they exchanged love poems, and on his return from exile, Locke was moved at Lady Damaris and her husband's households.
In political theory or political philosophy, John Locke refuted the theory of divine right of kings and argued all the persons are endowed with natural rights of life, liberty, and property, and the rulers who fail to protect those rights may be removed by people by force if it's necessary. Beliefs of government. To Locke, a government exists, among the other things, to promote public good and to protect the life, liberty, and property of its people. For this reason, those who govern must be elected by the new society, and the society must hold the power to instate a new rule it so insecure to protect the God-given, inalienable natural rights of the people. For their part, the people must obey the laws of their rulers. Thus, a sort of contract exists between the rulers and the ruled.
Good day, Professor Antigua. I am Jaden Pigoro. I am discussing about realism of John Locke's scholarly works. John Locke's most famous works are an essay concerning human understanding in 1689, in which he developed his theory of ideas and his account of the origins of human knowledge and experience. On two treatises of government, first edition published in 1690, but substantially composed before 1683, in which he defended a theory of political authority based on natural individual rights and freedoms and the consent of the governed. Locke's monumental and essay concerning human understanding in 1689 is one of the first great defenses of modern empiricism and concerned itself with determining the limits of human understanding in respect to a wide spectrum of topics. It does tell us in some detail what one of the legitimately claim to know and what one cannot. Later concerning toleration, much of Locke's works is characterized by opposition to authoritarianism. This is apparent both on the level of the individual person institutions such as government and church.
I am Girly Jo Rodriguez and I am going to share about pragmatism and the life of John Dewey as a pragmatist. What is pragmatism? Pragmatism is an American philosophy from early 20th century, and philosophers are William James, Charles Peirce, and John Dewey. So, education in pragmatism should be about life and personal development, and the teacher should help pupils to develop into a better person by teaching them lessons that are useful in everyday life. And the role of the teacher in pragmatism is helper, guide, and a philosopher. And now, we're going to talk about John Dewey's life. So John Dewey is the father of educational philosophy, and he said that education is life itself, and arguably the most influential thinker of education in 20th century. Who is John Dewey? So John Dewey was born on October 20, 1859 in Burlington, Vermont, US, and died on June 1, 1952 in New York. And he was graduated with a bachelor degree from the University of Vermont in 1817. So John Dewey was an American philosopher, psychologist, and educational reformer whose ideas have been influential in education and social reform. He was one of the most prominent American scholars in the first half of the century, and he was also known as the most influential thinker on education in the 20th century. So Dewey's influence on education was evident in his theory about social learning. So he believed that school should be representative of social environment, and that students learn best in natural settings. And he was an early proponent of pragmatism, a philosophical movement that gained popularity at the start of 20th century and focused on user experience to solve problems in a practical way. And modern educators continue to study, applied Dewey's theory that the best education is learning by doing, and which was crucial to the education progressive movements. So in my own opinion, according to Dewey, that he says that we do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. So I agreed with that because we all wanted to learn from our experiences, and most of us learned from our past and both mistakes and triumphs because we never repeat the experience as it was in the past. Thank you.
Beliefs. John Dewey was a leading proponent of the American school of thought known as pragmatism, which rejected modern philosophy's dualistic epistemology and metaphysics in favor of a naturalistic approach that saw knowledge as a result of an active adaptation of the human organism to its environment. So, John Dewey developed a pragmatic theory of inquiry to provide intelligent methods for social progress. He believed that the logic and attitude of successful scientific inquiries, properly conceived, could be truthfully applied to morals and politics.
Scholarly works. John Dewey was an American philosopher and educator who was a founder of the philosophical movement known as pragmatism, a pioneer in functional physiology, and a leader of the progressive movement in education in the United States. Pragmatism teaches that things which are useful, meaning that they work in a practical situation, are true, and that what does not work is false. I just get two of some of his famous books, which are Democracy and Education and How We Think book. In Democracy and Education book, written in 1916, Dewey tries to criticize and expand on the educational philosophies of Rousseau and Plato. Dewey's ideas were seldom adopted in America's public schools, although a number of his prescriptions have been continually advocated by those who have had to teach in them. In how we think book, thought training involves inductive and deductive reasoning, interpreting facts, and concrete and abstract thinking. It also includes the function of activity, language, and observation in thought training.
Idealism is the philosophy of ideas. Its underlying theme is that the only true reality is that of ideas. A well-known exponent of this view was Plato, a philosopher in ancient Greece. Plato was a student of Socrates and a teacher to Aristotle. One philosophical concept Plato is best known for is idealism.
In general, idealism refers to the idea of something better or at its best, and the term is commonly used to mean a possible time or outcome at its best. Platonic idealism is Plato's concept of perfect forms found in the eternal realm of forms, and that everything in material reality comes from and returned to these forms.
He is best remembered for saying that our reason should govern our appetite and spirit, since material reality is just a shadow of the ideal forms. The physical world, material reality, and the world of the senses divert individuals from pursuing the truth.
Realism explores what physical matter can tell us rather than asserting that only ideas exist. Best representative of this view was John Locke. Realism in philosophy is the view that certain concepts refer to real things. For Locke, it is the view that our sensory ideas represent material objects in the world.
He is best remembered for this idea that we must distinguish between the mental representation of an object and the object itself. The mental representation is an idea, probably a complex idea. The object in the world is not an idea but an object. The slogan is, ideas in the mind, qualities in bodies. Ideas can represent qualities as well as entire objects. Pragmatism, meaning work, is based on the notion that ideas must serve useful purpose.
John Dewey was a leading proponent of the American school of thought known as pragmatism, a view that rejected the dualistic epistemology and metaphysics of modern philosophy in favor of a naturalistic approach that viewed knowledge as arising from an active adaptation of the human organism to its environment.
He is remembered at this idea. Inquiry should not be understood as consisting of a mind passively observing the world and drawing from these ideas that, if true, correspond to reality, but rather as a process that initiates with a check or obstacle to successful human action, proceeds to active manipulation of the environment to test hypotheses, and issues in the readaptation of organism to environment that allows once again for human action to proceed.